You know, when an individual goes into the witness protection program, we generally understand the mechanics of it. You change your name, you move to a new city, maybe you adopt a new accent.
Right, or even a totally new profession. You just actively erase your past.
Exactly. You completely rewrite your personal history, and you do it because, well, your survival depends on it.
Yeah, it's a drastic last resort measure.
Yeah.
But it makes logical sense on an individual level to secure any kind of future.
Right, but imagine for a second that it isn't just one person doing this. Imagine an entire ancient community, like thousands upon thousands of people deciding to fundamentally rewrite their own spiritual and cultural DNA.
Which is something that sounds, frankly, almost impossible on a sociological level.
Right, because we're talking about a community altering deeply held practices they've maintained for over 1,000 years just to survive a hostile
I
takeover.
mean, the sheer logistics of coordinating that are staggering, let alone the intense internal resistance you would face from people who, don't want to abandon their ancestors' traditions.
And yet, that is exactly what we're looking at today. For those of you listening, whether you're fascinated by history, theology, or just the wild, desperate lengths human beings will go to preserve their independence, this deep dive is for you.
It really is a masterclass in adaptation, based on the historical texts we've been analyzing.
Yeah, our sources for this deep dive are just incredible. We are heading to the Malabar coast of India to uncover the dramatic 17th century ecclesiastical transformation of the Malankara Church.
It is a phenomenal historical pivot point.
Our mission today is to figure out how this isolated community survived colonial religious oppression, and specifically how a single bishop traveling in disguise changed the religious landscape of India forever.
But, to truly grasp the magnitude of the crisis that broke this community, we first have to understand the uniquely stable status quo they were fighting so hard to protect.
Right, the original blueprint.
Exactly. We are talking about the St. Thomas Christians, who are collectively known as the Malankara Nazranis.
And from what the sources show, the roots go back.
Yeah.
Like all the way back, right?
Oh, absolutely. We are talking about the first century. They trace their origins directly to the apostolic mission of St. Thomas the Apostle in India.
Wow.
Yeah, and even the most skeptical historical fragments confirm a thriving Christian presence in the Malabar region by at least the 4th or 5th century.
Those are just so early. But what's fascinating here is their cultural hybridity. Because for centuries, this was a community that was fully Hindu in its cultural context.
Completely. They were a high-status group, highly integrated into the local caste system. Sometimes they even served as warriors for local kings.
Right, but then they had these Jewish-Christian roots mixed in. I mean, the sources mentioned they even maintained Sabbath-like observances on Saturdays.
Yeah, and on top of all that, they were East Syrian in their religion.
It's such an incredible cosmopolitan blend. So they were basically geographically isolated from the Western Christian world of Rome or Constantinople.
Yes, but they were intimately tied to the Church of the East, which was centered way over in Mesopotamia.
Right. That geographic reality defined everything about them. By the 8th century, they were formally organized as an ecclesiastical province under the Catholicos Patriarch of Babylon.
And this created a very specific and I guess highly unusual division of power in India.
Okay, let's unpack this because the governance structure is where things get really wild.
It's a very unique dual leadership model.
Yeah, so the sources talk about this separation. You have the sacramental authority, which basically just means the power to ordain priests and perform holy rites.
Oh, exactly.
And that belonged to foreign East Syrian bishops who were sent all the way over from Mesopotamia. But the actual day-to-day socio-political power belonged to a local indigenous leader called the archdeacon.
Usually from the prominent Pakalamadam family, and they actually called him the Gate of all India.
The Gate of all India. That is an incredible title. It really highlights how much absolute local authority he wielded.
He was the undisputed leader on the ground.
I'm trying to picture this, and it sounds almost like a franchise model.
A franchise
Yeah, like if you're listening and trying to map this out, think of it like a multinational corporation. The corporate headquarters over in Mesopotamia sends a VP, the foreign bishop, to ensure the brand standards are met.
Right, to ensure that sacraments are performed correctly and the apostolic lineage remains intact.
Exactly. But the local CEO, the archdeacon, he's the one actually running the daily operations. He handles the local politics, he deals with the Hindu rulers, and he manages the community's vast wealth.
That is actually a highly accurate way to look at it, because the foreign bishops often didn't even speak the local language, Malayalam.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were purely spiritual figureheads. And it's crucial to understand why this dual structure mattered so much to the Nazranis.
Because it let them run their own lives.
Precisely. It allowed them to thrive and maintain their high social standing in Kerala for centuries without any real interference. They had their own local assembly-based governance known as the Yogam.
And they used the Aramaic or Syriac language for their liturgy.
Yes. And theologically, they followed a diophysite framework.
Okay, hold on. Diophysite. That is a heavy theological term.
It is a bit dense, yes.
For the listener who hasn't been in a seminary class recently, what does that actually mean on the ground?
Good catch. So, diophysitism is a Christological concept associated with Theodore of Mopsuestia. It essentially emphasizes the distinct divine and human natures of Christ.
Okay, so keeping them separate.
Think of it like oil and water in the same glass. They are in the same container, but they remain distinct and don't mix.
Ah, okay. Which I assume is what Western observers later disparagingly called Nestorian.
They use that exact word, yes.
Yeah.
Though Nestorian was actually a massive oversimplification that the West used as a political weapon.
Right, of course.
But the thing is, for the Indian Nazranis on the ground, the intricate theological nuances of that oil and water Christology were actually secondary.
Because the average parishioner wasn't debating Theodore of Mopsuestia.
Exactly. The primary practical reality was maintaining that unbroken apostolic lineage through the Persian Patriarchate while just governing themselves locally. It was a highly stable, highly profitable system.
Right. Until the Europeans showed up with a very different idea of how the world should work.
Enter Vasco da Gama in 1498.
The Portuguese arrive in India, and their stated mission is literally documented as, and this is a quote, Christians and spices.
Quite the combination.
Right. And you'd think, okay, they stumble upon an ancient, wealthy Christian community already established in India. They'd be thrilled, right? Instant allies.
You would certainly think so. But the Portuguese were absolutely horrified by what they found.
Because it didn't look like their Christianity.
Yeah, exactly. You have to remember the context they were coming from. They had brought a very militant brand of faith forged during the Reconquista.
Which was the centuries-long campaign to push the Moors out of the Iberian Peninsula, right?
Yes, a very violent generational conflict. And that bred a zero-tolerance, highly centralized version of Catholicism.
So to them, any deviation wasn't just a cultural difference.
No, to them, any deviation from Latin Roman norms was a literal, heretical threat to the unity of Christendom.
So they looked at the Mullingar Church, saw their local autonomy, heard their Syriac liturgy, flagged their perceived Nestorian theology, and decided this entire community needed to be brought to heel.
Which leads us to the massive suppression campaign detailed in the sources. The true climax of this cultural erasure is the Synod of Diamper in 1599.
Orchestrated by the Portuguese Archbishop Aleixo de Menezes. Okay, let's talk about the mechanics of this suppression, because it wasn't just a polite theological debate.
Not at all. It was a forceful takeover.
Yeah, they forcibly severed the Nazranis' ties with the Church of the East in Mesopotamia, and they brought them under something called the Roman Catholic Padroado. What is the Padroado exactly?
So the Padroado was essentially a treaty arrangement where the Pope franchised out the administration of the church in the newly discovered lands directly to the Portuguese crown.
Wow. So Portugal basically gets total control.
Yes. It gave Portugal sweeping powers to appoint bishops and control religious life without checking back with Rome for every little decision.
And they use it to enforce clerical celibacy, impose Latin vestments, and force the Nazranis to use unleavened bread.
Which was a massive point of contention.
I mean, if you're listening to this and wondering why on earth a bread recipe caused a geopolitical crisis, you have to realize what's at stake for them.
It's about the validity of the sacrament.
You're right. For the Portuguese, if you use the wrong bread, you aren't just baking badly, you are corrupting the literal body of Christ.
Exactly. And the Portuguese didn't just enforce this in the churches, they used their massive naval superiority to physically blockade the Malabar coast.
Wait, how do you even blockade an entire coastline in the 16th century?
Well, you don't have to patrol every inch of sand, you just have to control the major ports.
Ah, right. Bottleneck the trade routes.
Exactly. And they ruthlessly intercepted the specific Arab and Persian trade ships coming from the Gulf. By doing that, they essentially decapitated the traditional East Syrian hierarchy.
Because no new bishops could get through.
Yeah.
They just completely cut off the VP from corporate.
That's a great way to put it. And that initiates a brutal 50-year period known in the texts as the Roman yoke.
And the Jesuits took over. Right.
Yes, administering the church directly. They burned ancient, priceless Syriac manuscripts. They completely sidelined the archdeacon and tried to crush the local assembly, the Yogam.
It's wild. They treated a 1,000-year-old Indian church like a blank slate that needed to be rewritten in a European image. So my question is, was this aggressive Latinization purely a product of that Reconquista-era religious zealotry you mentioned?
That's a huge debate in the historiography.
Because it feels like destroying the local archdeacon's authority was actually a cynical, calculated geopolitical strategy to monopolize the incredibly lucrative spice trade.
It is a great question to ask of the sources, but the reality is that in the colonial Portuguese mindset, you couldn't separate the two.
They were one and the same.
Exactly. Religious uniformity and political control were completely indistinguishable. If you controlled a community's soul, their calendar, and their leadership hierarchy, you inherently controlled their trade networks.
Which, as history tells us time and time again, you can only push a proud, wealthy community so far before they snap.
At a snap they did.
Yeah, half a century of having their culture erased, their books burned, and their local leaders humiliated finally pushed the Nestorians to an explosive breaking point.
The spark that ignited the powder keg came in 1653. A prelate named Ahatala arrived.
Right.
Now, the historical texts differ on his exact affiliation, whether he was sent by the Pope or the Patriarch of Antioch, but he was an Eastern bishop.
And the Portuguese intercepted him.
Yes, and rumors rapidly spread across the coast that the Portuguese had murdered him by drowning him at sea.
The grief and the raw anger. I mean, you can practically feel it bleeding off the pages of the historical accounts. Thousands of Nesranis gather at a place called Cherry under the leadership of their archdeacon, Thomas.
It was a massive mobilization.
And they take what becomes known as the Cunan Cross Oath. This is such a visceral historical moment. There are so many people gathered that they can't all physically touch the cross to swear the oath.
Right, so they actually improvise.
Yeah, they literally tie ropes to the cross, pulling them out into the crowd so everyone can hold on and participate. Yeah. And they vow, collectively, never to submit to the Portuguese Jesuits again.
It was a mass, grassroots uprising. The sheer scale of it was totally unprecedented. But as soon as the dust settled, they were faced with a massive structural problem.
Right. They had successfully rejected Rome, but they had no bishop of their own.
Exactly. The blockade is still happening. So in May of 1653, they take a desperate, historically wild step.
This part is crazy.
At a meeting in Alangad, 12 local priests gather, lay their hands on Archdeacon Thomas, and they simply proclaim him to be a bishop,
giving him the title Martama I. As someone reading these sources, the sheer desperation of that moment is hard to overstate.
It breaks every rule in the book.
All right, for you listening, having 12 regular priests ordain a bishop is a massive, glaring violation of ancient church law. A bishop has to be ordained by other validly ordained bishops.
That is the entire concept of apostolic succession.
Exactly. They believed they were risking their eternal souls, but they did it anyway. It highlights just how desperately terrified they were of remaining under the Roman yoke.
It truly does. And this raises an important question, which the Carmelites, who were sent by Rome to do damage control, immediately pointed out.
Right, the community fractured.
Yes. The community had split over this illegal ordination. The sources drop some heavy terms here. Pesaikur and Puthamkur.
Okay, for the listener trying to keep this straight in their head, how do we distinguish who is who?
Fair point. The terminology can be dense. So Pashaya in Malayalam means old. So the Peshayakur is the old allegiance.
Okay.
These are the people who eventually decided the risk of eternal damnation was too high and went back to the Roman Catholic fold.
Got it. And the other group?
Puthang means new. So the Puthankur is the new allegiance, the rebels who stuck with Martama I.
So old allegiance went to Rome, new allegiance stayed independent.
Right. But the Puthankur had a glaring problem. They had won their independence, but by relying on an irregular ordination, they had lost their canonical legitimacy in the eyes of the broader Christian world.
Right. Without a validly ordained bishop, their claim to apostolic succession was completely broken. They are spiritually stranded.
Exactly.
They've barricaded the doors against the Portuguese, but they are stuck on an island. So Martama I sends a desperate SOS back to the Middle East.
He's basically saying, please, anyone out there, send us a bishop to make my ordination legal.
And the answer comes from a very surprising place,
It does. It doesn't come from their traditional East Syrian network in Babylon. It comes from the Syriac Orthodox or West Syrian Patriarchate of Antioch.
which is totally new for them.
Right. Antioch saw a golden opportunity to expand their influence into a massive region where they previously had no historical foothold.
And this is where our main character finally enters the story. Mar Gregorios Abdul'Galeel, born in Mosul, serving as the Archbishop of Jerusalem.
Which the sources point out was basically considered the fifth patriarch. So he is a very high-ranking, very big deal.
Right. And he actually agrees to go. He makes this incredibly perilous journey all the way to India in 1665, and he does it entirely in disguise,
He had no other choice, really. The Portuguese still actively patrolled the waters.
even though their power was slipping.
Yes, their geopolitical power was waning. The Dutch East India Company had actually defeated the Portuguese in Cochin 2 years prior, in 1663.
Which gave Mar Gregorios a slight tactical opening.
Right, but he still had to be incredibly careful. He likely traveled dressed as a simple merchant or an ordinary pilgrim, navigating the complex backwaters of Kerala to avoid detection.
Wow.
He lands at Panani and travels quietly until he meets a group of parishioners at North Paravur.
Imagine the tension of that moment.
It must have been electric, because only then does he reveal his true identity. He presents his Stathikon, which is his official letter of empowerment from the Patriarch of Antioch, proving who he is.
And he wastes no time. He gets right to work. He canonically ordains Mar Thoma I in 1665, regularizing his status.
And later ordains his successor, Mar Thoma II, in 1670.
Boom! The apostolic legitimacy of the rebellious Pathankur is restored. They're a real church again. But, and it's a big but, there's a massive catch.
A profoundly large catch. Mark Gregorios isn't East Syrian, he's West Syrian.
Right. So what does this all mean for the people sitting in the pews? To use another analogy, it's like the Indian community realized their smartphone operating system had been deeply hacked and corrupted by the Portuguese.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right. And to lock the hackers out for good, Mar Gregorios doesn't just install an antivirus program, he changes the entire operating system from iOS to Android overnight. It works, it keeps the hackers out, but now the interface, the apps, the charging cable, everything looks, feels, and functions completely differently.
That is an excellent way to describe the Antiochianization process, because Mar Gregorios didn't just reverse the Latin practices that the Portuguese had brutally imposed.
Oh, he went further.
Much further. He systematically dismantled the community's own ancient East Syrian practices as well.
It's a total top-down overhaul. He introduces leavened bread, which directly counters the Latin unleavened bread.
Right.
He allows deacons to marry before entering the priesthood, openly defying Roman celibacy rules. He literally rips the Latin statues out of the local churches,
He even changes the actual language script they use to write and pray.
shifting them from the East Syriac Chaldean script they'd used for a millennium to the West Syriac Surto script.
And, perhaps most profoundly, he initiates a massive theological pivot to match this cultural shift. Remember the diophysite oil and water Christology we discussed?
Yeah, keeping the human and divine natures distinct.
Well, he shifts the community away from that entirely. He introduces the Miaphysite Christology of the Syriac Orthodox Church.
Okay, let's do another quick explainer on that one. Miaphysite.
If diophysite is oil and water, Miaphysite is wine and water mixed together. It emphasizes one united, indivisible, divine human nature of Christ.
Okay, but surely the people didn't just blindly go along with this. I mean, after swearing a literal blood oath and risking their lives to preserve their ancient traditions from the Portuguese, they just let a brand new guy from Antioch show up and change everything about how they worship.
Well, it was a strategic alliance born of absolute existential necessity.
Survival.
Exactly. But the brilliance and arguably the sheer ruthlessness of the strategy was how the new leadership framed it to the public.
How did they spin it?
Mar Gregorios and the local leaders took the label Nestorian, which, if you recall, was the very insult the Portuguese used to justify oppressing them in the first place.
Right.
And they weaponized it against their own past. They told the community, yes, the Portuguese were evil and wrong, but our old East Syrian ways were also heretical Nestorianism.
Oh, wow.
They said this new West Syrian way from Antioch is the true, pure apostolic faith.
Wow. They literally burned their own historical ships so the community couldn't go back?
They distanced themselves from their Mesopotamian heritage to solidify a brand new identity that the Portuguese couldn't possibly lay claim to.
But as you might expect, You can't just erase 1,000 years of lived tradition overnight by installing a new operating system. The sources make it very clear that this transition was incredibly messy on the ground.
Very messy.
For over a century, the community lived in this deeply weird state of cultural hybridity, where old East Syrian customs kept popping up alongside the new West Syrian rites.
It was a highly contested, multi-generational struggle. The most dramatic challenge to this new narrative actually came decades later, between 1709 and 1731.
With the arrival of a bishop named Mar Gabriel.
Yes. He was an East Syrian bishop sent by the Catholic Host Patriarch of Babylon. So basically, the old corporate headquarters coming to check on their lost franchise in India.
And he shows up, and he starts successfully poaching followers. He pulls people from both the Catholic Pazhayakur faction and the new Orthodox Puthankur faction.
Which proves that the old East Syrian identity, the muscle memory of the community, was still very much alive in the hearts of the everyday people.
Right, and it was an existential threat to the local leadership's new narrative. Mar Thoma IV and V had to actively fight back against Mar Gabriel to protect their hard-won autonomy and their new West Syrian alignment.
And this is where the historical texts get incredibly telling.
Here's where it gets really interesting, yeah. Because in the historical letters documented in our sources, Mar Thoma IV and V write desperately back to Antioch, begging for help to counter, and I quote, the Nestorian heresy.
It's astounding.
Think about the deep, almost tragic psychological irony of that. They are using the exact same insult that was beaten into them by their Portuguese oppressors to attack their own ancestral traditions.
Just to protect their new political identity. It shows you just how thoroughly the historical narrative had been rewritten by the victors.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Mar Gabriel's eventual death without a successor in 1731 essentially severed the final direct living link to the Church of the East in India.
But the transition to the West Syrian Rite was so slow, so painful, and so complex.
It wasn't fully formally completed across all parishes until the Synod of Mulanthruthi in 1876.
Which is mind-blowing to think about. That is over 200 years after Mar Gregorios arrived in disguise.
Generations of conflict.
And when you look at the legacy of this entire saga today, the denominational landscape of modern Kerala is directly shaped by this specific era of crisis.
Absolutely. The old allegiance faction, the Pazhayakur that stayed with Rome, eventually evolved into the Syro-Malabar Church.
Which, ironically enough, actually preserved the old East Syrian Rite.
Exactly. And the new allegiance faction, the Puthankur that followed Mar Gregorios, eventually branched into the Malankara Orthodox Church, the Jacobite Syrian Church, the Mar Thoma Syrian Church, and others.
And through it all, Mar Gregorios himself is remembered as a foundational hero. He is venerated as the Yaku Berdono of Malankara,
which refers to a legendary historical figure who revived the West Syrian Church in the Middle East during its darkest hour.
Wow. And he was formally canonized as a saint in 2000. If you go to North Paravur today, his tomb isn't just a historical marker, it is a major active pilgrimage site.
They still preserve his physical relics there too.
Yeah, his vestments, a golden chalice, and the Holy Arulika, which is a reliquary containing relics of 11 saints and a fragment of the True Cross.
They are tangible, physical links to that desperate moment of survival in 1665.
It really is one of the most incredible stories of communal resilience I've ever read. For you listening, I think the ultimate takeaway from the sources here isn't just a timeline of names and dates.
No, it's much deeper than that.
It's the profound realization of just how deeply malleable cultural and religious identity can be when pure survival is on the line. The Malankara Nasranis faced total erasure by a global colonial superpower.
And to survive, they didn't just dig their heels in.
Right. They adapted, they compromised. They traded one ancient, beloved heritage for a brand new one. What seems to us today, looking back, like a rigid, unchanging ancient tradition, is often the result of a very practical, very messy historical compromise.
Which leaves us with a fascinating, almost uncomfortable thought to consider as we wrap up.
Yeah.
Mar Gregorios didn't just restore a broken church. He essentially transplanted a completely new ecclesiastical identity to navigate a 17th century geopolitical chess match between colonial European empires and ancient Middle Eastern patriarchates.
Right.
It really makes you wonder how much of our own deeply held cultural or religious norms today, the things we consider ancient, pure, and absolutely unbreakable, are actually just the unexamined artifacts of a forgotten historical crisis.
Wow. It's exactly like slipping into witness protection. At first, you're just pretending to be someone else to stay alive. But eventually the disguise becomes a reality, and generations later, everyone forgets you were ever anyone else to begin with. Thanks for exploring the sources with us today on The Deep Dive.